And now, to add to these 4 books from local writers, we've got Wayne Johnson, who's going to read from the Militarized Zone. What did you do in the Army, Grandpa? And Wayne, I'm still confused. Is this for children? Because if it is, I'd be a little afraid to read it to my children. Yeah, so let me flip the page here. You know those 300 videos that I mentioned that we have available on our Waterline Riders page? Before we came tonight, I queued up one of them to post at 9 o'clock, and that is Wayne's reading from December of 2014, because it was so much fun. He read The Incredible Exploding Jewish Santa Claus, and you know, just like you watch your favorite Christmas movies, watch or read, you know, listen to this because it was lots of fun. And you know, that was December of 2014. I thought maybe he was a one-trick pony because we haven't heard from him since. But no, he's back with something from this book, What Did You Do in the Army, Grandpa? And he's reading A Rose by Any Other Name Still Looks Good in a Dress. And I'm just going to say I would have had trouble explaining this to my children. But welcome back, Wayne Johnson. See what you think.
Thanks, Ann. You know, there's a few of us in the 8th Army GIs who were getting rotated back to the States shortly. And you know, one afternoon we were just sitting around barracks laughing about something funny that had happened over the year that we were there. And one of the guys happened to say, you know, somebody should write a book about this. And then one of the other guys said, nah, nobody would ever believe it. So here's the unbelievable book. And it's the one about which Publishers Weekly said, huh? So this novel, it's based on real people and real events, just like MASH or Catch-22 are. But those are all novels, just like this one is. And some of the characters are combinations of 2 characters, and some events are combined and compressed for just to keep the novel full and keep up the pace. But it's not all jokes. I mean, there's love story in here, there's tragedy, there's grocery store coupons. No, that's in my next book. The coupons will be in there. So anyway, this event that I'm reading here takes place in 1970, and it's long before we ever heard of political correctness. So please view it with that in mind. I've kept the book at a PG-13 level, so that if any of you want to buy it as a present to your grandmother, you don't have to worry about it. It's okay, as long as she's over 13. So it's it's $14.95, like it says here on the barcode, and $2 of the sale will go to the Fox Valley Veterans Group. So, interestingly enough, somebody bought a copy of this and put it on Abe Books in the first edition section, and they listed for $101.66. So that might be some inspiration for you to buy it. I mean, I have been thinking, you know, what am I doing here selling it to bookstores and on Amazon when I could be selling it there? So, at any rate, I better get going here before I get the hook. So as A Rose by Any Other Name Still Looks Good in a Dress. This takes place in 1970, and the main character, the protagonist, had just got settled in his new job in country in Korea, and it's his first day, and a couple of the guys in the office want to take him out on the town. Late that afternoon, I hopped down the stairs of the barracks, tapping my umbrella along the railing, and kicked open the front door. The sun peeked through the few clouds, the remainder of a large bundle that had produced a quick shower while I was settling in with Bob and Dave. They waited patiently for me on the front stoop. Now, dressed in our civvies, with bumper chutes in hand, we were ready to evacuate the compound for beautiful downtown Seoul, Korea. Bob smiled at me and adjusted his glasses. Since it's your first time in this city, what do you want to do? Well, when I picked up my pass, the clerk gave me a Army-issued pamphlet about the city and the country and the military protocol to observe with citizenry when you're out. I pulled it out of my back pocket and unfolded it. Well, it says here the Koreans had a fully functional civilization established while we were still ancestors were living in caves. There's got to be some interesting places in this area we could visit. I looked back at the brochure. Remnants of the Koryo dynasty or the Chosen dynasty. Bob and Dave looked at each other. Or maybe somewhere, I said, even today, Buddhist monks still adhere to their traditions as they have for centuries. Places where one can get a feel for the deeply rooted Confucianism of the people. I closed the pamphlet. Silence. Okay, said Dave, we'll go to Itaewon. Oh, good. What'll we do there, I asked. Get drunk and obnoxious and chase girls, said Dave. Oh, that was my second choice. I dropped the pamphlet in the trash can and next to the stoop. Onward to wine, women, and song, cried Dave. You mean cheap Korean beer, mooses, and bad bands, said Bob. Whatever. Dave made an elaborate sweeping gesture with his umbrella and pointed the way to the main gate and 6 hours of freedom. Mooses? I asked Bob. Moose. It means girl in Japanese. Well, not moose actually, it's masumi. We sloshed through the puddles and reached into our pockets for passes as we approached the gate and the MP guard. Two heavily made-up high-heeled and mini-skirted young Korean ladies displayed small white cards to the MP and hurried into the compound. Bob and Dave plastered big phony grins across their faces. Good evening, Sergeant, said Dave. He held his pass up next to his grin. Great not to be checking the passes of outgoing GIs and the IDs of incoming business girls, don't you think? The GI muttered something suggesting Dave had an unnatural birth and gave him the universally recognized one-finger salute. Bob and I fished our passes out and marched into the busy sidewalk that ran along the compound wall. So those were the business girls I've heard mentioned. Do I get 3 guesses at what kind of business they're in, I asked. The kind that makes you glad the Army doesn't put saltpeter in your scrambled eggs anymore, Dave said. At the end of the wall was an intersection guarded by the bronze statue of a Korean war hero. General Coulter, I said. Dave and Bob quickly turned their heads. Where? Asked Bob. Oh, the statue. I read it in the brochure. We stood on the curb waiting for Drake in the traffic. I casually looked around and noticed a few Korean women standing on the street in the deepening twilight shadows. They wore elaborate, flowing American-style gowns. A couple were even hoop-skirted. Odd attire, but from where I stood, they were beautiful. A break came, and we started across. Dave and Babe trotted slightly ahead of me. They barely glanced at the young lovelies. Are these guys blind or what? Maybe Dave was wrong about the saltpeter. I took my time, discreetly trying to get a better look. One meticulously coiffed and ruffled, hoop-skirted Asian vision of Scarlett O'Hara floated toward me. She lightly touched my arm as I stepped on the sidewalk. I looked into her dark eyes. She was lovely. My heart pounded. My temples pounded. Everything on my body capable of pounding pounded. The sweet scent of her perfume wafted its way through the heavy air and etched its essence into my brain. I decided to get a divorce immediately and marry her. Got a light, she breathed in a deep voice, and put the cigarette she held between 2 dainty fingers to her glistening rosebud lips. I stuck my umbrella between my knees and fumbled through my pockets for a match or a lighter or an acetylene torch, anything that held the potential to burst into flame. I found my emergency matchbook and struck a light. She inhaled deeply. So, where you go? She looked at me over those long black eyelashes and exhaled smoke out of the side of her mouth. I just stared, rendered speechless by her beauty. My reverie was pierced by the distant, harsh sound of an angry male voice. It seemed to come from 1,000 miles away. I turned ever so slightly. The source of the angry voice was Dave. He walked briskly toward us with Bob at his heels and pushed in between me and my gorgeous apparition. Karachogi, go! He virtually spat the words into the nymph's overly painted yet angelic face, pointing off in some undefinable direction with his folded umbrella. She blurted something Korean back at him. I gradually drifted back to earth and noticed that her euphonious voice had lost a tad of its sultry femininity. Fire burned in her eyes. I was afraid her plastic lashes would melt. "Ka! Out of here!" screamed Dave. His angry face pressed in almost nose to nose with hers. He waved his umbrella unthreateningly overhead. By her tone, I guessed the young lovely had yelled something less than flattering, and then shoved him, hard. Dave stumbled back a couple of steps. His blood boiled up through his neck and into his face. He drew back both arms and shoved her harder. She tumbled backwards off the curb, arms and legs flaying, skirt and white petticoats flying. My mouth dropped open in horror and bewilderment. I looked over at Bob. He scowled down at her. Had I really seen this? Had I really seen what this big American butthead did to the high-spirited but nonetheless pale flower of the Orient? I started toward the sputtering, kicking Asian jewel in the gutter to help her to her feet. Ignoring me, she jumped up and lunged at Dave with pseudo-karate-like movements. A crack in the jaw from Dave's fist sent her sprawling back on the pavement. Her wing tumbled off her head and flopped along the curb like some unfortunate, fuzzy creature that had just bounced off the bumper of a speeding Korean cab. Again she jumped up, wigless, with a crew-cut head sticking out of her peaches and cream debutante gown. A crew cut? I was dumbfounded. Why did Korean women wear crew cuts, wigs over crew cuts? Was this an accepted fashion? If the wigs hid crew cuts, what did the remainder of her elaborate gown hide? Ew. I didn't get a chance to draw any conclusions because while Dave smashed his umbrella down on that particular crew cut, the half-dozen or other young ladies converged on us. Bob growled, grunted, and parried one with his umbrella. Another attacked from the rear and jumped on his back. He bent and flipped her over his head onto the frontal attacker. "Start swinging," he cried at me. I couldn't recall this particularly protocol situation being addressed in the pamphlet. Obviously, it wasn't the start of a discussion on the contemporary response to Mozart's Don Giovanni, so I took Bob's advice. I imitated his growls and swung and stabbed D'Artagnan-like in all directions. Dave, meanwhile, grabbed a kick in midair and twisted the kicker's foot. Bob landed a blow into the satin midsection that dislodged the foam rubber body part from its nesting place in a lacy bodice and sent it bouncing onto the street. I punched and kicked like a screaming maniac. When the last skirted Korean was prone, the three of us regrouped, grabbed our umbrellas, and ran like hell. I glanced back at the scene we left. It looked like the aftermath of an explosion in a life-size Barbie doll factory. We raced through crowded market areas, down busy sidewalks, until our breath was gone. We stepped and stood with heads bowed, chest heaving. I looked at Dave inquisitively. He noted my expression and smiled through his labored breathing. Bob grinned and pushed his glasses up. We all broke into a fit of laughter, which ended in a paroxysm of coughing. I was the first to speak. What kind of culture exchange was that? Well, don't you know? Dave asked. He stared at me for a couple of seconds. Oh, I guess you wouldn't, he puffed. Of course not. I was in love. I had already made divorce plans, set a wedding date, and was picking out the music for the reception. They were those guys who dress up like women. You know, what do you call them? Second lieutenants? No. No, he replied, deep in thought. Transvestites, I asked. Yeah, Dave said. Bob nodded in agreement. The Koreans call them he-she's, said Bob. So here I am 6 days and 10,000 miles from home, bruised and gasping for air on an Asian street when I've just fended off a gaggle of Korean what-do-you-call-ems with an umbrella. Isn't this where Rod Serling steps in? You were just lucky we were with you, said Dave. Yeah, I know. I could have been starting a family by now in the honeymoon suite of the Fried Rice Hilton. Hey, don't laugh. Ron, you know this guy who works in G2? He didn't find out until he was already back at her apartment after things had heated up and he reached down and grabbed something that wasn't supposed to be there, said Dave. I think I heard enough. He ended up with a goose egg on his head and no wallet. I get the picture. Dave grinned. Well, it's beer time, said Bob, and let's remember to go back through a different gate, maybe through the south. I straightened my collar. Yeah, I really can't afford a wife on army pay, especially one that gives me beard burn. Now I figured I was ready for anything. How foolish of me.